brothers, do you recall when the grasslands reached to the horizon? And the deafening roar of countless wings overhead. Back when Rome was a village and Britain the Emerald Island. Before we gave up on our future and buried our dead.
So today, like I said, I want to just basically go over the shamanism itself, and I only have 1 page worth of notes to cover. So it's our episode 7, and it is Shamans and Death. And again, shout goes out to Marwaen. I'm using a lot of his material. The links are going to be posted under this video. I've already posted the links to his new channel on the previous videos, and it is in Russian, heads up. So material I'm going to be talking about is mostly going to be based again on Siberia and Mongolia and those kind of Eurasian areas of the world, because that is the areas that I'm most comfortable with, I know most about. So the interesting thing about shamanism as a practice is the fact that shamanism is something that is very similar around the globe. I mean, whether you're talking about Native American practices, you're talking about people in any location of Africa, you're talking about people in Papua New Guinea, anywhere else, there's certain aspects of these beliefs that seem to be very closely matched, and certain practices within the beliefs that, for all of their diversity, the very essential core concepts seem to be very closely matched as well. Now, it's interesting to debate, and of course there's no way for us to actually know whether or not this is something that stems from the common root of all of humanity. Back on, oh, there's Jake. Whether it's something that stems from the common root of all humanity, and it's just divergence of the same practices over time and space, or whether it's something that is a function of human psyche as such, whether this way of seeing the world, this way of understanding the other reality is something that is just essential to all humans in general. And so the word shaman, it is something that became widespread as a term for this particular practice, or these particular practices, I should say, just because the researchers who were working with actual functionaries of this, I'm not sure if the word functionaries is right, but performers of these emissaries, whatever you want to call them, of this particular belief system that wrote most about these sort of traditions, other people who worked with peoples and tribes. Okay, anyway, but so anyway, the reason why we're using that particular term is because shaman is something that was just a term that was used a lot in cultural research over time, and it's something that became worldwide known. For example, in Siberian nations, the words that are more likely to be applied to a person who practices these sort of traditions would be either a boa or kama. Kamalat is actually, in Russian language, the word for performing of this, for the actual action of performing these sorts of rituals and performing these sort of functions. No one is actually born a shaman. Well, that's not quite true. The great Gesser, who is the great Mongolian spirit, who was actually a spirit who decided to come into this world through birth into a human form, he was born a shaman, but that's because he wasn't a human being. He was a spirit that entered a human's body before that body had a soul of its own and actually was born that way. But typically, a human being is not born a shaman. You're not born with that ability. What you're born with is either a gift, or if you want to call it a curse, of the talent, of the inclination to communicate with the other side. And I say a curse because mostly in traditional cultures, this is not a fate anybody particularly wants for themselves. Most people, when they realize that that is their designation, that that is their path in life, oftentimes try to escape it, try to avoid it, try to sidestep it, because this is a destruction of your entire way of life as you know it. A shaman does not prosper. A shaman typically, well, first of all, a shaman cannot deny his services, his help to anyone who comes to him or her. It is a functionality. It is the essence of a shaman to actually perform the shamanistic function, kamalat in Russian language. Because if a shaman stops at any point in time performing that function, chooses, for example, you have been a practicing shaman, I don't know, for 25 years, and you're just sick of it, and you decided to become an actor, and you have now joined the film crew and you're acting, well, the spirits are not going to forgive you for that. The spirits are going to punish you for that. And your chances of maintaining your sanity and yourself are pretty much at zero. But as a practicing shaman, it is not typically good to be charging for your services. Shamans are not supposed to charge for their services. Now, they might ask for certain offerings that they're then going to pass on to the spirits. For example, some spirits might like tobacco. Other spirits might like buttons from coats. Other spirits might like, you pick any random item really, from dental floss to tree leaves. Those kind of things may be something that the spirit, that particular shaman communicates with, and that the shaman may ask you to bring for the spirit. But as far as physical monetary or any sort of material payment for the shaman, it's not typically right for shaman to ask for payment, actual payment for the services. So what the shaman gets really is whatever the shaman is able to do in the breaks in between the times when he's helping other members of his tribe or his group of people, and really what people bring to him out of their own free will as a kind of a thank you gift, as a kind of a token of appreciation. You can imagine you cannot really make a huge career in that. And if you have a wife and children, and if those children are still small, and of course shamans often do have both, wife or husband and children. Some do, some don't. But you have to support that family, and you're probably going to be struggling. Because, for example, if you live in a traditional culture and it is, I don't know, it's the deer, migration time, and the deer herds are passing right through your neighborhood, and this is when the entire tribe, the entire group goes hunting, well, you're off helping somebody who's having a possession issue, and you're going to miss that opportunity to hunt for the rest of the year, and then you're going to be in pretty difficult shape. So another thing is that a shaman oftentimes has to leave their actual family behind, and I don't mean their wife and children. Hopefully, if you are lucky, your particular gift is going to be discovered early on in life, when you're still a child or a teenager, and so you have not yet established any sort of a, children, family, wife of your own. But you're going to be torn out of your familiar environment. You're going to have to move to a strange place, live with strange people, and undergo some pretty horrific and terrifying experiences. If you're lucky, the shaman who picks you up and the shaman who trains you and teaches you is going to be a kindly person. That's 50-50.
Mhm.
And a lot of cultures, the balance of, again, white and black shaman, and white and black, by the way, in like in Mongolian and a lot of those kind of cultures, they don't have the same attachment of good and evil. I think I've mentioned that before, as they do in the Western culture. It's just different colors, different sides of the world, I guess, different ways of approaching the spirits. Again, dark or black shaman usually uses intimidation, force, and forces spirits to do things, to where a white shaman usually tries to negotiate, be diplomatic, seduce, bribe, and otherwise convince the spirits to assist. One can be both. And in some cultures, one is always both. In some cultures, the two are always separate. But regardless, a dark shaman, a black shaman is oftentimes, it impacts their personality, and they sometimes become rather unpleasant individuals to deal with. They're just very forceful, very aggressive. But that's not always the case. You can have a very nasty person who is a white shaman, and you can have a very nice, kindly person who happens to be a black shaman, though that's a lot less likely to happen in actual life. So how do you know that you're a shaman? Well, first of all, that's one of those gifts that is hereditary. Oftentimes, families who already have shamans in them closely watch their own offspring and relatives, young children, especially at teenage years, to see if there's any sign of, shamanistic gift in those children, so that those children can be taken as early as possible into the learning, into the teaching by an actual practicing shaman. Sometimes people are born not in a family that has that sort of hereditary history. Moreover, it is entirely possible for a shaman to be born in a culture that is inherently does not even believe in shamanism. There are cases like that known. In shamanistic cultures, actually, at least in the Siberian and the kind of, again, the Asiatic cultures around and in Russia, on former, Russian Empire territory and Soviet Union territory, I mean, there were some very interesting beliefs, and some of them actually coincided among several different groups of people that were unrelated. And there have been cases when people from a different culture who have been experiencing these symptoms, which I'm about to describe, have come to seek or came across a shaman and actually were taught, and that's what saved them. So you know that you're a shaman, and you're definitely a shaman if you start showing the signs of shaman sickness or shaman illness. And those signs can be manifest themselves in a number of ways. It can happen in early childhood. It can happen oftentimes does happen in adolescence and teenage years. Occasionally it can happen at fully grown, mature age. I actually have a story like that. There was in the city of Tuvensk, region of Tuva, there was a man, a communist party member, and he was a party aficionary who was an atheist. He was an engineer. And this happened in 1988, which when you can imagine in the Soviet Union, any sort of non-atheistic beliefs were not highly supported or highly approved of. And he was living a normal life in the city. He was taking part in the party meetings and all the party activities. He was, like I said, communist, atheist, and he started having bouts of the shamanistic sickness. And there was no, from the interviews with him that took place probably about 2 years ago when he was 70 years old. Well, at the time when he had the onset of the sickness, he was about 40. The only thing he could think of is that he lost his wife due to illness about 5 years prior. But I mean, it's been 5 years, and it wasn't a life shatter. I mean, it was a sad loss in his life, but it wasn't something that had fractured. It wasn't some horrific traumatic event other than the normal loss of a loved one. But he started having these urgent symptoms of the shamanistic illness, and he tried to suppress it. He tried to deny it. He tried to hide from it, because what he was looking at was destruction of his entire lifestyle, right? He has a career. He has a place in the party. He has social status. He was dating someone at that time who was also communist and an atheist. But he came finally to the conclusion that if he did not immediately seek guidance from a shaman, he was going to go insane. And so he dropped everything. He dropped out of his work. He dropped out of his, social activities, his political activities. He had to go to some secret underground apartment somewhere in the city to try to find someone who would actually teach him, and through somehow track down a teacher. And he's been a practicing shaman ever since. And that's sometimes things like that happen as well. So with shamanistic illness, what usually happens is a person starts acting differently, and they start feeling differently. They start seeing or hearing things that are not from this reality. Their border between this world, if you want to explain it from inside the tradition, their border between this world and the other world starts to thin, and they start to see onto the other side, and they start to see onto the other side uncontrollably. In other words, to where a practicing shaman can choose to see this side or the other side. They can choose to go from here to there of their own volition. An uncontrolled budding or shaman, or an insane person actually, is kind of in a situation when they cannot open and close that gate. That gate opens and closes on its own, and they have no control. And so, for example, one young man was describing that he realized that he was having shamanistic gift when, they were deer herders, and he knew that his father had 20 deer. Well, he started seeing first he started hearing voices and he was a young man. This was before the typical age of schizophrenia onset, that were just kind of talking in the background, not really talking cohesively to him, but just constant kind of sound, background voices, like he was overhearing other people's conversations. Then he started seeing extra deer. I mean, first it was 25 deer, 40 deer on top of deer in places where there should have not been deer that just obviously were not real. And he still tried to fight it because he really didn't want to change his life and become a shaman. So then he started having another problem. He watched his father die. As in, his real father in real life was perfectly fine and functioning and, being a normal human being. But what this man was experiencing is he was looking at his father and he was seeing a corpse. Moreover, this corpse was progressively starting to decompose and fall apart. Flesh started falling off it. He started to rot. And at that point in time, this man realized that something was really seriously wrong. And he gave up and he went and he found the guidance he was looking for. Sometimes it can be a situation where a specific spirit comes to you and persistently asks you to be a part of his or her reality, calling you to the other side, enticing you to the other side. Sometimes this may be your future companion spirit. Sometimes it could be an evil spirit that is actually intending to destroy you. Sometimes it could be a playful spirit that is just having fun with you, not realizing the damage that they're doing to the person that they're doing this to. So what shamans do in the cultures where shamanism is prevalent is oftentimes they regularly monitor the children in their own community, and also they do make rounds around surrounding communities if there's not a practicing shaman there regularly, and check all the children of the appropriate age for any signs of shamanistic illness, any signs of strange, unusual, or just different behavior. Another thing that oftentimes will be a sign that a person is intended to be a shaman is a physical deformity, or missing body parts at birth. A person who is born blind, a person who is born without an arm or leg or with underdeveloped body parts, a person who is born with strange physical conditions, oftentimes is believed to be already marked by the spirits, because that person is obviously in a traditional society is physically unable to perform the functions that a hunter or a herder would be able to perform. And so there's a part of them that is almost not in this world, that's in the other world already from the very birth, and the spirits mark them, they already want them in the other world. So those kind of children are picked out. Children who are atypical in the sense of what we would call psychiatric behavior or any sort of developmental issues. So children who see things differently. For example, let's say a little girl draws a picture, and she draws a picture of a big spiky triangle with a bunch of arrows coming out of it, and you ask her, well, what's that? And she says, oh, that's mommy. Or you have a little girl who's running around with 2 red flags going, flapping her hands and dancing around and singing, and you ask her, well, what are you playing at? What are you being? And she says, oh, I'm a salmon. Well, why is that a salmon? Well, that's what salmon look like. What are you talking about? So children who see the other side already, in other words, they're seeing people on this side, events on this side, through the prism of the other side perception. Children with sudden and unexplainable phobias, and not the typical phobias when a little kid is left alone in the dark and they're crying. But for example, a young man or woman is walking down, the mall with a group of their friends, and suddenly they just get absolutely horrified. And they can't really explain what it is that frightens them. And this happens persistently. Those kinds of expressions sometimes. Sometimes even expressions of aggression and violence, though mostly any sort of aggressive or violent behavior is really more a sign of you being possessed or touched by spirit, rather than actually being a person with a shamanistic gift. But on occasion, for example, you might have a little boy who twists the head of a puppy. And the horrified parents might ask, well, what are you doing? You crazy, you insane person, why did you do that? And the kid says, well, the puppy asked me to. And he might think very kindly of the puppy. He might be very fond of the puppy. And his explanation may be that the puppy wanted to be on the other side, and he was doing it because he loves the puppy. In a situation like that, you might want to look further into it and figure out whether it is actually some sort of pathology, or whether or not it is a child who really quickly needs to be properly taught on how to handle his or her gift, because they could be dangerous to the surrounding humans if that does not take place. Let's see. Another really, really, really big thing is anybody who is transgendered or anybody with border issues. And what I mean by that is anybody who is transcending in their daily behavior or starts showing transcending behavioral patterns. Again, somebody who might be fluid or changes their gender altogether spontaneously. And this does not apply to homosexuality. Being homosexual does not mean that you have any shamanistic inclinations, but it's that switch, it's that being in that borderline condition. So for example, a child says that she does not feel comfortable being indoors, she's suffocating, she wants to be outside. So you take her outside, and she's agoraphobic all of a sudden, and she wants to go inside. And you take her back inside, and she's uncomfortable, she wants to go back outside. And then she finally maybe settles by just sitting, on the doorway. Or for example, if you live at a shoreline and a person does not feel comfortable on land, they feel really heavy, they feel just everything is too solid. So they get into the boat and they are now on the waves, and everything is unstable. They need to get back on shore. Those kinds of situations where a person is constantly between here and there. There have been cases where people with these sort of, symptoms of their shamanistic gift, for example, wound up making a float and living neither on the land nor on the sea, or building an apartment or house in such a way to where they can fulfill those borderline kind of requirements. And then anybody who today we would label as OCD, for example, or somebody with an obsessive compulsive behavior, such as repetitive making of patterns, figures, drawings, any sort of behaviors like that. Now, I want to make it clear that in shamanistic traditional cultures, and there's actually a whole region of Russia where shamanism is officially recognized as the official religion, the official faith of the people. And in this region, the shamans are allowed to visit various psychiatric places where, clinics, and pick out the people who they believe have shamanistic illness versus people who are, the shamans themselves say, well, that's a crazy person, you treat them, you medicate them, you take care of them. There's a very clear division between those two concepts within the culture itself. A person who has the shamanistic illness and who has not been properly trained by a shaman, with very rare exceptions, is definitely, and there is a certain point of no return. If it's not caught in time, and if you don't go through the proper training, you're likely to be forever irreversibly insane, because that gate is going to just be pretty much kind of blocked in an open state, and you will not be able to tell the difference between here and there. So I'm going to stop here and let anybody comment. I think David wants to say something. I'm going to silence here real quick.
Yeah, just one reoccurring theme is yeah, can y'all hear me? Good.
Yes.
Death. And death can be death of someone you know, someone that's close. Very often a near-death experience will be the catalyst. And this is not so much Siberian, this is more New World, but who by strict definitions aren't shamans. Shamans are Siberian. But in the broader anthropological, near-death experiences can very often trigger that illness, if you will. But that's the one that I didn't notice you touching on, so I thought I'd mention it. All right.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to comment on what David said. Yeah, we haven't really touched on that very much, but it seems to be, I guess you could say, common with shamanic practices and ideas that, in fact, as it's my understanding, that a shaman that gets closer to death, that's actually part of the ritual almost. It's kind of like, the warrior has certain rituals. Well, the shaman has to understand death very, very well, because that is one of the biggest journeys, and it's not something that the tribal members are supposed to fear, but it can only be understood by certain people, and the shaman is who they go to. I mean, it's like the priest, today, kind of.
Absolutely. And I think, and for shaman, I'm just going to pronounce it the way I've always pronounced it, but for shaman, it is the biggest journey of it's the biggest really changeover of their life for any living creature, but for shaman in particular, because they have already been communicating with that other world, right? They know that spirits, the spirits that are waiting them on the other side, whether they're friendly spirits or they're aggressive spirits or they're just unknown spirits, but it's something that a shaman has a very clear understanding of just through his or her daily practice. And so definitely for them, it's a transition that seriously needs to be readied for, and it's something that they can help others with, because again, they have seen the afterlife in a sense, though it's not quite the same as in monotheistic kind of more modern religions. That border, again, back to the idea of borders between this life and the other life, is very transparent for somebody who's practicing actively in this sort of a faith.
Yeah, that's basically the. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
Just was going to mention that very often a thing that's often called the little death is a part of a part of the shamanic experience. It's that and a cycle of rebirth often.
And that's something that I was going to get to right towards the end of this episode. So really quickly, very interesting take on the situation was people with learning disabilities, people with various developmental issues as far as mental capacity goes. They are typically also taken by the shamans under their care. People who are not capable of actually communication, people who are incapable of speech, who are incapable of normal daily functionality, oftentimes they cannot become actual shamans, but what they do make is really good mediums. And in a lot of traditions, that the shaman will take such a child and rear such a child, first of all assist them with their socialization, and use them in rituals as a, I guess, almost a human vehicle, or human vessel for the spirits to come into this world through. They are oftentimes also in those cultures sent to those people. And then another thing is about borderline various autistic spectrum conditions. Somebody who our modern society would diagnose with autism of any kind, I mean, anything from highly functional autistic children to somebody with completely dysfunctional, speech incapable autistic manifestations. A highly functional autist is probably number one candidate into a shaman in traditional cultures oftentimes, and various autistic spectrum disorders or conditions or various related behavioral differences. But somebody who is incapable of speech, there's one interesting story, and this is actually from Livingston, and this was in Central Africa. This was, Livingston was a Protestant Christian, and so to him this was a horrific story. But there was a little girl in one particular African tribe who was incapable of speech. She never spoke, and he wanted to take this child under his care because he was a Christian and he wanted to assist her. And the locals told him, no, we're going to send her off to a shaman. And the reason why he wanted to take her under his care is because she was incapable of being a part of the tribe. Nobody wanted to feed her. She was kind of left to her own means and mostly kind of just ostracized. Well, when he saw this little girl sometime after she was sent off to a shaman, she was speaking. And of course, to very Christian, very Protestant Livingston, that was a horrific thing that they have done to this poor child by putting an evil spirit inside her. And this evil spirit spoke through her lips, basically. But in a culture like that, I think it's interesting to see that these shamanistic practices, they can actually change the condition of some people that today's today's psychological practices are not capable of improving. The thing with shamanistic illness is if somebody is determined to have shamanistic illness, it has been proven time and time again that if they go through the proper procedure with proper training with a shaman, and if they make it all the way through, they're going to be fine. They're going to be a perfectly normal functioning human being. But if they don't, oftentimes we're looking at a person with a severe psychiatric or mental disability as a result of this. And again, if a shaman stops practicing at any point in time for no good reason at all, not due to illness, not due to old age or some other happening, but of their own free will, just decides to stop practicing, the spirits will often punish him or her by sending them back into the same kind of bout of the shamanistic illness. Now, there are people out there who kind of have the gift, but are not quite capable of being a full shaman. Those people in Evenki culture, they call them the bitten ones, or the ones who had parts bitten out, because they believe that a spirit came and kind of took a chunk out of them, and their shamanistic gift has been forfeited that way. And Mongols, for example, they look very much down on these people. They believe that these people have made some sort of a blunder on the other side, and there's a spirit that is now upset with them and is blocking their ability, their talent, their gift. So for people like that, if a shaman wants to help a person like that, they can do a special ritual. At least in Mongolian culture, they can do such a ritual. And it's a ritual where they take a person who has a borderline gift, or for example, a person who has a full-blown gift but simply does not want to be a shaman, it just does not feel the calling. They really just want to go on with their regular life. Well, in Mongolian culture, they can do this ritual where they take this person and they put them through the process of exiting from the other side, and then exiting from the other side again, and then exiting from it again and again and again and again, over and over and over, until it's almost beaten into them, it's almost drilled into them how to not be a part of the other side. That gate in that case shuts forever. They will never see the other side. They will never experience it again. It's been pretty much nailed shut. So that is an option. That is something that can be done in some cases, and it will also prevent them from developing full case of madness or disability. They will just be able to function normally without the visions, without the sounds, without the creatures from the other side ever bothering them again. But they cutting that part of themselves off forever. Let's see. Okay, so on average in normal shamanistic society, there's an X amount of children born in any given village, settlement, herding community, whatever you want to call it, tribe. That's typical, usually 1, 2. It's almost organic. New shamans are born as old ones are kind of on their way out. But there's sometimes cases when there's a lot of, all of a sudden in one particular location, there's a lot of children with that kind of a gift born. And that's usually a cause for concern, because what that basically means, there's a breakthrough, almost like a tear from the other side. Something has happened, reality has thinned, that dividing wall between the two realities has thinned, and there's basically a breakthrough of spirits that's initiating these children, that's bringing these children into contact with the spirit world. On another hand, if there's a tribe where there normally have been children with such a gift born, and suddenly they just stop being born and there's no more, and there hasn't been any for a while, that's another reason to be concerned and to investigate what's going on, because there's a good chance that somebody has blocked or cursed that tribe or that location. So there's that interesting sort of thing. So again, children with shamanistic gift can be born to societies that have no shamans at all. Not to offend anybody with a deep religious belief, but I've heard such commentary from certain people from some of the Siberian tribes that the people of Israel had a very powerful shaman born onto them once upon a time, and his name starts with A. And unfortunately, there was nobody around to teach him how to properly interact with spirits. So he went into the desert and met a very powerful and very malevolent spirit. And then the whole history of Israel unfolded. But it's just a kind of a funny view, but because in a shamanistic world, you really, when you have a situation, when you have a monotheistic deity, right? I mean, if you look at deities from that tradition, from within that point of view, any deity is really just a big spirit. And if a big spirit has gotten big enough and demanding enough to forbid an entire nation to talk to any other spirits ever, 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 well, man, that's just some not very good shamanistic practices, right? I mean, they feel kind of bad for a lot of monotheistic religions. Any comments, any thoughts?
I was just going to interject real quick, Julie, because I know that you have a powerful interest in Native American ideas. But one of the things about pretty much all of the Native American culture that I've studied, including people that I've actually met, is that the whole idea of there being a creator or a god, whatever, it's not really mutually exclusive to dealing with the spirit world in general. In fact, even though the creator is one big thing in a lot of Native American cultures, at least in North America and the United States of America, where I've been, the creator is just one part of it. It's the spirit world in general. It's not about there's an exclusive, the creator somehow just does everything. That's not really how most Native Americans that I have met tend to think, but that's just been my experience. And I've never even read anything about, even though a lot of them converted to Christianity, some of the concepts are a little bit bizarre to a lot of Native Americans. So I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. And I think we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the kind of the spirits in general and how people interact with spirits. You're absolutely right. There is in a lot of cultures, not just Native American, even some of the north of Russia cultures. I know that the same similar concept is a case in some of the Australian Aborigine cultures. There is that concept of a creator. In Mongolian culture, again, you have Tengri, right? But this creator oftentimes it's not, the creator is the creator. It's a force. It's not an entity. It does not actively get involved in people's daily affairs. It exists. It's great, but it's not a micromanager. It's not in your business all the time. The difference being the reason why this particular commentary was made about the relationship of, I was trying to be diplomatic, the relationship of people of Israel was their ancient people of Israel was their early relationship with their God, is the fact that the God of Israel is a jealous God, right? If you read the Old Testament and if you read some of the Hebrew texts, he is a jealous God. He is a demanding God, right? So we have a case of a spirit who is, remember when we talked about kind of the husband-wife, spirit-husband, spirit-wife situation? Well, this kind of very similar situation from within some of the traditional shamanistic type societies. That kind of relationship with a God who is jealous and controlling. It does not allow you to communicate with any other spirits at all, to the point where like your whole bloodline is never ever allowed to speak to any other spirit. That's a little bit unhealthy and troublesome to them. So it's just kind of a funny way of looking at it. That's all. And actually, what you said something else, Ryan. Give me a second. Oh, about Christianity and converting to Christianity. The reason why some shamanistic societies, at least in the Eurasian part of the world, have been more open to conversion to Christian belief system is because, and we're going to get to initiation, and majority of the rest of our discussion really is going to be about the initiation process. But in their belief system, the process of gaining those powers, the ability to communicate with the other side and becoming an actual shaman and a practitioner is very, very horrific and very, very painful. To where here come Christians who say that, hey, you can gain something kind of sort of like those powers, except you can do it through love and good grace and all these pleasant and positive things, and you can become a shaman without suffering the horrible, horrible suffering that you would in any shamanistic tradition. Just really quickly, I want to mention the case of in Buryatia, which is another region in modern day Russia, which is also a shamanistic region. Well, it was conquered by the Buddhists, I think, if I remember right, it was around 16th, 17th century, maybe a little bit earlier. And there's a sacred mountain there, which has traditionally been considered to be the site of the spirits, really kind of the place you went to communicate with the spirits. And it's the Mount Alkhond. 600 shamans were burned by the peaceful and very non-aggressive Buddhists at one time upon that sacred mountain, which was sacred mountain of the shamans. And those shamans, when they were being burned, they had placed a curse in the surrounding area, and for a long time in that whole region, no shamans were born to those peoples. Well, since then, many years obviously passed, and the whole tradition has has been reborn. And they're practicing that again to the point where now it's become a Russian tourist attraction where people go to check out what it's like to hang out with real shamans. And so now if you go to Mount Alkhond, you can meet such a person as the highest shaman of Buryatia, right? There's no such thing as highest shaman of anyone, right? There is such thing as they pretty much more or less throw, draw straws or whatever, throw lots. And one of them gets picked out to serve as a highest shaman of Buryatia for, let's say, 5-year time period. And this poor person is now tasked with meeting all the tourists and performing, the showing of the proper sacred rituals of the shamans and entertaining the visiting crowds. And then they rotate out. And it's not something that they enjoy doing at all, but it's something they just do because, well, tourism is tourism and it brings money and it helps the economy. Also during the communist times, again, there was crackdown on any sort of religion, and there was a prosecution of people who practice shamanism. And so what happened again in that region, people started hiding children with shamanistic talents, in some cases, unfortunately, even killing them to avoid any sort of prosecution falling upon the settlement or upon the tribe. And that was just an unfortunate episode in their history. And right along that little kind of anecdotal episode from the Soviet history, Yakagur is another tribe, and in their language, they, during the communist time, they were hiding out a lot of the non-communists, kind of the representatives of the former regime of the Imperial Russia, and people who wanted to overthrow the Red marching on Red Army. And so, of course, the Red Army commissars, they would come to these villages seeking the bandits and the outlaws whom they wanted to arrest. And these people really liked the bandits and the outlaws because hiding in Siberia, these people would live with them. They would become a part of the tribe. They would kind of get integrated into families. And so they would hide and protect these people. And so when people from Moscow, people from Soviet Russia would come and looking for bandits, to them in their culture, the word bandit now officially means a noble, good, respectable person. So that just became completely integrated into their language. So to say that my grandpa was a bandit means that my grandpa was pretty much a paladin, a knight in shining armor. So it's just a funny little story.
That happens in a lot of cultures, by the way, Julie. I got
yeah,
a kick out
sure.
of that.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Genghis Khan. We were talking about sudden fears that children sometimes develop. Genghis Khan is a very unique character in Mongolian tradition. I've mentioned that before in his whole lineage. He is believed to be a great uninitiated shaman who was not initiated, and he was not stopped from practicing his shamanistic gift. He just never did anything with it. And it is believed that his gift was so absolutely powerful, so unique, that even though he was not initiated shaman, and even though he did not actively practice shamanism, it sometimes would break through to the surface. And some of his victories are explained in Mongolian culture by this foresight, by the spirits who came to his aid, even though he was not a properly initiated shaman. Well, his grandson, Batu, who was also one of the great Mongolian commanders, when he already conquered most of central Russia and most of area around Moscow, and he was more or less sitting on the top of Volga River, and has accomplished everything he wanted to as far as the tribal leader goes. He decided to go through with the initiation, and he became a full-blown shaman. And because he was Genghis's favorite grandson, he was the kid that Genghis pointed at and said, "This is the next me," right? He was allowed to do pretty much. I mean, if he would have asked them to bring him an airplane from the future, they probably would have brought him an airplane from the future, fuel and a pilot, in tow. But he became an actual full initiated shaman, and he's believed to be one of the, if not the strongest shamans in Mongolian history. Let's see. Another interesting anecdotal story in the city of Tuva, for example, there's I've heard about and read about an instance where a shaman was having some personal problems, and so the shaman went to a psychiatrist. And he, psychiatrist started asking him some questions, saying, "Well, okay, how's life?" And he said, "Well, life is good." "Well, how's your family?" "Well, everything is good. My relationship with my wife is good. With my children, everything is good." "How is your practice?" "Well, I'm doing my shamanistic stuff. It's going great." "Well, how do you see the spirit world?" Well, the shaman tells this, this psychiatrist, he says, "I'm kind of seeing, the spirits that come to me as of late, they're all spirits of sadness, and none of the colors are not bright." He says, "Oh, you must be depressed." And then the shaman got treated for depression. But that's the degree to which this is integrated in some regions of Russia into the culture, to where you actually have actual medical professionals who are dealing with, who know well enough the shamanistic tradition and who understand it well enough to be able to use it as actually a diagnostic tool, for example, in helping people who are shamans with their problems. But yes, a shaman can be depressed, and depression is definitely not a sign of a shamanistic gift. Depression is just depression. So the last thing that I really wanted to talk about, unless somebody else wants to say something.
Oh, there was something that I wanted to touch on, because it doesn't really have anything to do with the initiation or anything of the shaman. You say shaman, but I thought it was interesting, and it's in the book of elders that I have, but it's about how the shaman, this is mostly about North America, but I think that other countries do it also, but it's about the use of psychotropic drugs in ceremonies. This is not tandem to a shamanic practice. In fact, I don't think that many cultures do it, but this was shocking to me, because this is from is it actually pronounced Ute or Oot? Because when I was living with them, they couldn't give me a straight answer. But they started to use peyote. And oddly enough, I'm only going to say religious ceremony, because now in the United States of America, federally, it is recognized as a religion. Native American practices. They call it a religion because it is protected. It's under our First and 14th Amendment. But a couple hundred years ago, they started to get it from, which tribes was it? They were from much farther to the south. But they would start to take the hallucinogenic cactus peyote, and presumably they traded for it, but they actually use it to, it's not about a person becoming a shaman, but I think that a shaman is probably the one that is usually doing the practice. And it's usually about curing some other mental illness, whatever, alcoholism, trauma, whatever. But that's obviously something that it's kind of like a melding of the role of the shaman and the just the individual of the tribe into understanding the spirit world and understanding their connection to other things. And that's a big thing in parts of South America. I think that they do it in Siberia also, but you would know more about that.
Absolutely. And so the use, and again, because I want this to be a kind of a PG-rated podcast, I kind of skid around certain subjects. But no, that is a very well-known fact. And in Siberian cultures, in Mongolian culture, and a lot of other cultures, oftentimes it's one or another type of a substance. Oftentimes it's not a narcotic or a psychotropic substance. Oftentimes, for example, it can be tea, really strong tea. It can be tobacco. A shaman might smoke a whole pack of cigarettes before they engage in a ceremony. For example, in Mongolia, there's such a thing known where they practice, they, for example, will run for hours, race their own horse until they're at the point of hyperventilation and exhaustion where they start. It's a way of achieving that transcendent state. It's a way of loosening those gates between here and there. And that makes sense why it will be used when you're working with somebody who is not used to voluntarily lifting and lowering those gates. It's something that is definitely oftentimes used in an initiation, and really any sort of substance at all works. Coffee works, like I said, tobacco works, certain kinds of mushrooms. I don't know what this mushroom is called. It has a white kind of stem.
Is Amanita muscaria?
Hold on, no, it's bright red cap with bright white spots in it. It's very
I think it's Amanita muscaria.
Okay.
That's,
whatever that is called. It's called fly killer in Russian, but that's the most common substance used in.
That's the white, well, the red with the white spots. That's the one that I heard about, and here at least I've been told that it's called Amanita muscaria because the active ingredient is muscarin. But yeah, it's a very bright mushroom with start.
It's very pretty. It's very beautiful.
It is pretty.
And they grow commonly everywhere in Russia, so they're super gorgeous. I mean, I have some pictures I've taken of them. They're just they look like they're fake. They're so pretty. But anyway, those substances are oftentimes used. They also play a part in initiation process. So what does a shaman do with a child, a potential student that he or she picks up and takes home with them? Well, first and foremost, for the first little while, especially if it's a little kid, they do nothing with them. This kid just lives with the shaman or the shaman and the shaman's family. If the shaman happens to have children of their own, that's about the same age, there's a good chance some of them might have those gifts themselves and might be even partially undergoing the training. So the kid is just going to hang around the house. The kid is going to do normal domestic chores. The kid is going to go hunting if they go hunting. The kid is definitely going to follow the shaman around, be taken by the shaman around everywhere for every ceremony. Basically, this kid is in the shaman's presence all the time. And the shaman will be telling this kid everything about what it's like, about his own or her own experiences, various stories about their own initiation, various traditions and and tales and various fairy tales, even rumors in the shamanistic world that he or she rotates in. So the child will constantly be exposed to that concept, to that idea. And at some point in time, well, the other thing that the shaman is going to do is he's going to talk to this child a lot. Talk about what the child is feeling, what the child is seeing, how the child is experiencing the world, asking questions, trying to understand what it is that's making the child behave one way or another. Are you seeing a spirit? Well, what kind of spirit is it? Is it blue or is it yellow? Is it big or is it small? Is it scary or is it not scary? Is it scary? Is it chasing you? Well, the shaman does not try to put anything into the child's head. Instead, the shaman constantly allows the child to communicate what it is that they're seeing, that they're experiencing. And at some point in time, this child is going to start going into first early trances with the shaman. First of all, to see if the child is even capable of doing that, if their gift is an actual gift and not kind of a halfway gift. If the child is capable of going to those very light trances, and sometimes they will use those kind of facilitator substances to help the child break to the other side, because sometimes they might be already built up in a barrier. Then what the shaman will do, he or she will follow the child into the spirit world, and usually will go a couple levels deeper. Remember we talked about the black shaman Tanjin, who had the male lover of the river spirit? Well, Tanjin, he was a very evil man, besides being a black shaman. He had 12 students in his entire life. And he used to say that a good teacher goes at least 3 levels deeper than the student when the student goes onto the other side, but remains invisible, and that the entire time the student is on the other side, the student should be completely and utterly terrified and not know that the teacher is present and watching him or her. Now, Tangent was not a nice person. Out of his 12 students, not counting his own son, I believe 6 killed themselves in the process of training. 3 other ones died in the process of initiation or lost their minds, and he killed them himself. But the ones who survived became very powerful shamans, even though kind of nasty people as a result of all that. But a good teacher will show himself or herself to the student. The student will know that the teacher is nearby, but the teacher will not interfere with the student's interaction with the spirit world. And usually it will be the lesser spirits, kind of the animal spirits. The child is just allowed to, or whatever spirits naturally gravitate towards that child. And for example, they will sit there and they will do this together. The student is not allowed to go into the spirit world on their own. The teacher will always go with him or her, and they will discuss what the student is experiencing. The teacher will observe the student's experience from the outside and ask questions. Again, what are you seeing? Is it a fish? Was it coming at you? Oh, well, I see this fish differently. Why do you think you see this fish this way? Or for example, if the child is having an experience where something is chasing it and trying to kill it, the teacher is not going to try to calm down. He's not going to try to interfere. What he's going to do, or in some cases, actually, I'll tell that in a minute, he might interfere, but what he will do is he's like, oh, you're getting chased. Oh, he's going to eat you. Well, come on, let's run. Come on, let's jump over here. Follow me. Let's jump over here. Let's jump over to that mountain. Whew, you made it. It's not going to get you. In some cases, if there's a persistent spirit haunting a child, like a spirit has attached itself to the child, the shaman might allow the child to bring out that spirit, and then might step into the spirit's way and try to communicate with the spirit one-on-one as an adult to an adult, to understand what's going on and to try to help the student resolve this persistent phobia or this persistent haunting that he or she is experiencing. Well, this will continue for a little while, and then at one point in time, the teacher is going to this. I'm describing the Mongolian tradition, particularly, by the way. And at one point in time, the teacher will completely prohibit the student from entering the other side at all. And another thing that they will do in this first training thing is they will practice over and over the process of exiting the spirit side, so that the child has a very good concept of how to stop it from happening. They're capable of shutting that door, and they're capable of closing that gate if they need to. Well, at one point in time, the teacher is going to tell the child, no more going to the other side, period. We're not doing it. Sometimes the prohibition may last a couple of months. On occasion, it may last several years, as long as the teacher feels is necessary. And during this time, not only is the student prohibited from at all interacting with the other side, but the shaman will actively interfere and help the student cut off any sort of breakthroughs from the other side that may take place, or any sort of wanderings that may accidentally take place. And this student will be kept in isolation from the other side for as long as he or she requires it, until such a moment that they, even if the student comes to the teacher and says, hey, help me, I want to go back to the other side, let's do it again, the teacher will say, no, we're not doing this, until the student finally loses patience and consciously and intentionally himself or herself makes the effort to cross over, despite the prohibition, against the prohibition by the teacher. And it's very, very crucial during that time to be close enough to your student so that you catch that moment. And at the moment when the student goes to the other side, you go together with them. And oftentimes that's the point in time when, to one degree or another, the process of initiation will start taking place. Oftentimes, for example, the teacher will introduce the child or the student to their own guardian spirit or to their own companion spirit. And it's not going to be the teacher who initiates the student, it's going to be the teacher's spirits who do the initiation. Now, what does the initiation look like? And this is where almost every culture across the globe is identical in one way or another. You're going to die, and you're going to die horrific and absolutely macabre kind of creative sort of death. It almost always involves some sort of deconstruction, disassembling, destruction, dismemberment, disembowelment, being torn into pieces, or in some cases, for example, you may rot away. You instantly grow old and then you feel yourself rot to nothing. You may be burned. In some tradition, you are put onto an anvil and hammered into little bits. In some tradition, for example, wild animals might tear you apart, or spirits might tear you apart, or you may be in such an absolute horror and terror of what you're experiencing on the other side that Tangent himself described his initiation as that He was up on a hill, and I believe it was 8 great ones came to him, and he looked at each one of them, and each time he looked at one, he died in absolute terror, and he was so afraid that he tore out his own entrails and he ate them, and he tore out his own heart and he threw it away, and he kept trying to tear off his own limbs and his own skin, and he would not die, and he was so afraid that all he wanted was to stop existing. In some cultures, it could be a situation where you're consumed by an animal. For example, an animal tears you to shreds, it consumes you, you go through its digestive tract, you're completely processed into its body, and then suddenly you become that animal. Or, as a variation of that, the animal may become pregnant and start swelling and give birth to you. Or you may turn into ash, and the ash may be spilled onto the earth, and the tree may grow from that ash. And you may step out of the tree. Bottom line is, you are not only killed, and you feel every second of this death, every second, every sensation, as if it was in real life, because it is in real life. But at the same time, you are then reassembled by the spirits. And what happens during the process of reassembly, some parts of you may be missing, and other things. First of all, some of your parts might be completely rearranged. For example, your head can be placed where your reproductive organs had previously been, and your reproductive organs may stick, out of the top of your neck, or your arms and your legs could be switched places. Your legs could be coming out of the top of your head. In some cases, some of your body parts will be removed and replaced with animal body parts or with foreign objects. For example, a tractor engine instead of a heart, or a little brown frog instead of your heart, or just anything at all. Wings could be put instead of your eyes. What you reassembled as is going to be nothing like what you were before you went through this procedure. Now, of course, if you come out of this trance, of this initiation process, on the human side, you're going to look just like a human being, but on the other side, you're not going to be human at all. You could be some sort of a toad with wings. You could be some sort of a giant tractor with horns and the tail. But those parts that are given to you by the spirits is what allows you, what gives you your power on the other side. Those are your secret weapons. Those are your abilities, your strength, what makes you unique. And so when a student comes back from this initiation process, if, of course, they come back, the teacher is going to want them to account for every detail of what they experienced, how they experienced it, and exactly what about them has changed. It is a horribly painful process. Even with a very kind, very caring, and very supportive teacher, not every student will survive it. Not every student will come back with their sanity intact. If the spirits are very kind and they're very much like you, they may do this very gently and gradually, kind of dragging it out over time, and sometimes the initiation can last for days on end. You can be in a trance for days on end. If the spirits, I'm kind of like, in case of Tangent, his favorite saying was that if initiation is not over within 4 hours, then the student is not worth it, which means you experience all that instantaneously, all this suffering, pain, and trauma. It is not everybody's psyche, not everybody's nervous system can withstand that sort of fear, that sort of pain. So it's a very traumatic experience. And this concept of being disassembled, reassembled with changed parts is something that I think goes through our culture very, very, very prominently. And it appears over and over in our fairy tales, in our cartoons, in our various epic heroic stories, in mass media all around us. And it's something that is later very much incorporated into more modern, even monotheistic, even very modern religions and belief systems. And I think that's about it. That's what I wanted to say. Anybody else wants to add anything?
I would just say that the deconstruction and reconstruction is, of course, that's not just within a shamanic initiation, but it's actually I'm just going back to the Native American beliefs that I've studied, but and also with maybe not Buddhist, maybe it's a Shinto, but destroying and the tremendous terror and trauma of tearing a person to pieces in order to put them back together in this world is also common. John Mackey Evans wrote The Sword and the Serpent, and it was very important that you have to destroy the body and then you have to build it up. And in Native American religions, again, I'm just going to call them religions, spiritually, sometimes also a person has to be taken apart as well as physically, and then they are put back together. But it's not fun or anything. It's very traumatic. And of course, in the spirit world, it's a whole nother matter. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. And any initiation in general, because a lot of people's practice initiation, various initiation practices, it's never pleasant particularly, right? I mean, it's always kind of a very traumatic and horrifying experience. But the key difference in the shamanistic tradition is the fact that some of your body parts are replaced with things from the other world. And that gives you your source of power. And that's
there's also the animal spirits, as many people call them. People can also channel the animal spirits, or they can have a relationship with them, of course. Sometimes they are very benevolent, sometimes they're trouble. But it's important to understand also, I think, if you are a shaman, that yes, you have to be able to understand that there can be a lot of conflict and a lot of pain with dealing with the animal spirits. Now, the spirit of a tractor engine, not quite as sure about that. But
you don't know some Soviet tractors.
Oh, I fixed my share of tractors, and I can almost see through metal. But
yeah,
I'm not sure if tractors have a spirit or not. But boy, I tell you, it seems like they do sometimes.
You know what? I think that based on this discussion, I think that unless somebody utterly objects, I think that we are going to do the next episode on totemism and fetishism in the most respectful kind of way, okay? The concepts that items have a soul, the concept of kind of the ancestral soul, ancestral spirit animal, because those are the things we have not touched on, and it's the last large topic that I really wanted to cover as far as the whole shamanistic tradition and the foundation traditions of all of our beliefs and worldviews really go. And then I think after that, we're going to move on to the first civilizations. Is everybody okay with that? Wave your hands at me if you are, or something. Awesome. All right. Anybody else wants to say anything else?
I just have something real quick.
Mm-hmm.
As I was sitting here listening to you speak, Julie, one of the things that I kept going back to was my familiarity with Celtic shamanism, and how, for example, the Irish have the Tuatha Dé and the She as the spirit worlds and the spirits within, and how Christians, when they pacified Ireland, basically took most of the Tuatha Dé and made them into saints. Like, for example, Briet became Saint as an example. And Taliesin, which is one of the Irish myths, he was the greatest Irish shaman, for lack of a better term, and how the myth talks about his transformations from shape to shape before he was eventually devoured as a piece of grain by a spirit, which then gave birth to him as a fully realized child. So it's very interesting correlations from culture to culture.
I'm going to ask you to do some of the, but once we get to Ireland, because that's one of my favorite topics, especially with the whole ray of light shooting out of your forehead, and the turning inside your own skin, and the whole 9 yards. Anyway, that whole story, there's a lot of interesting stuff there, especially how it affected our mass media and feminist literature these days, and all of our really romance literature. But no, I mean, and that's what I mean, that a lot of those concepts are echoed throughout every culture throughout the world, because even in places where that has been deeply rooted out, buried, and destroyed, even in modern Muslim world, in the Middle East, where there has been one invasion after another, and then Islam came, and Islam is a very particular religion, but it's not very, well, neither is Christianity, actually. Neither is any other monotheistic religion. Like I said, even peaceful Buddhism was quite not so peaceful when it decided to go conquering neighboring regions. But even in places where these beliefs should have been completely rooted out, they still exist. They exist as echoes, for example, in the story of the genies in the story. I mean, they come through, they come through like weeds into every form of religion that falls up. It's something that is never eradicated because it's something that occurs spontaneously in people's psyche. Children develop these sort of beliefs spontaneously. And to me, that's a proof of the fact that it's either a fundamental reality or it's a fundamental factor of human psychology that just exists for whatever reason. But I think that is a very, very interesting topic. Jake, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I learn everything, different things when I come. And being brought up as Roman Catholic, this is totally opposed pretty much everything I had been taught in the past. So even my mother, the tractor, that was a joke. That's an interesting concept, but I can start to visualize that now.
Yeah, and you, especially in Catholic Church, I mean, so many of these concepts so deeply embedded in Catholic rituals, beliefs, not just Catholic, Orthodox too, Christian Orthodox beliefs systems. I mean, look at Saint Francis, right? I mean, his whole experience really is something very, and a lot of those experiences that a lot of the more exalted members of the church throughout history they just have the flavor of the shamanistic experience of one kind or another, worldview of one kind and another. And if you look at any major religion, monotheistic or otherwise, that idea of death and rebirth through suffering, through some sort of decomposition, deconstruction, dismemberment, just death in general, it just happens over and over and over again in every religion around the world. So yeah, that's just a recurring theme for sure. All right, then. Thank you, everyone. Oh, you want to say something else, Jake?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a chapter of shamanism in the DSM, or if a lot of people just get to spend their life in a psychiatric institution.
I'm sorry, I don't know what DSM is.
That's the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, I think.
Okay, that's what I thought it was. I didn't want to make a fool out of myself.
Sorry.
I should have known. It's knowing abbreviation in one language and then translating into another, it becomes confusing. But no, there's not. But there is such thing as DSM and shamanistic tradition. That's the thing. They distinguish between the two. And that's, like I said, I mean, there's a region in Russia when the shamans are allowed to enter psychiatric facilities and pick out those patients that they believe are shamans and can be kind of helped without any sort of medication or treatment. Mm-hmm.
And I also sent you a listing of 2 places I found that basically you can go to a school to become a shamanistic minister. And like I said, I have the money, but I do not have the calling. But it seems like a nice place to go to spend money, which a true shamanist wouldn't, really take. But to get a certificate and then to practice to gain more money, that sounds like counterproductive.
That's not a scam to me.
My God doesn't need money.
Well, I don't think any gods typically need money unless they, for some reason, have taken upon themselves a human form and need to pay for their, food and their roof over their head, which does occasionally happen in various traditions. But yeah, that sounds like a scam to me. I think most shamans would look at that and go, for sure. Anyone else? Then let's plan on next Thursday.
Sounds good. Everybody be well.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Yeah, have a good week. See you next time.
Bye.
Yeah.
Orange glow of a campfire, pale electrical glow. Both cast out shadows as our legends unfold. We are the archetypes that exist within every man's soul. And we will live forever as long as stories are told. We are the archetypes that exist within every man's soul. And we will live forever or as long as stories are told. We are the archetypes that exist within every man's soul.